Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. It is wonderful to see some faces of old and faces of new. On behalf of the Center for Process Studies, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this 50th anniversary conference. I think that's deserving of an applause, don't you? Well, I'm Andrew Davis. I'm the program director here at the Center for Process Studies, and it's been my pleasure to be in contact with many of you, moderators, presenters, over the last year or so as we bring together far too many details. We're going to try to pack a 50-year legacy into 3 days. Miracles might happen. It's been a perfect example, I'd say, of Whitehead's refrain that the many become one and are increased by one, just applied to a conference. So it's been a completely collective endeavor, and I want to give a special thanks, especially to our co-organizations. We have the Cobb Institute represented here. We have the Institute for Ecological Civilization. We have IPDC, the Institute for the Postmodern Development of China, all of which you can learn about at the different booths here on the left of the sanctuary during breaks. Huge thanks to Claremont United Church of Christ, to Jasmine, to John, to Pastor Jacob. We thank you guys. This is a beautiful facility, and we're happy to use it. Now, I mentioned we want to try to fit a lot into 3 days. That may be a challenge. The process movement is deeply interdisciplinary, and we've tried to represent that in 3 different main focuses for each day. Now, today is the first day we'll be focusing on Reenchanting religion, process theologies in the 21st century. We'll be hearing a number of presentations on those themes. Day 2, tomorrow, that's Thursday, we're focusing on philosophy and science. We're going to attempt to understand nature and the nature of reality and hear from a number of presenters on those topics. And the third day is process in practice. That's Friday. We're focusing on society, sustainability, and ecological civilization. One thing you may notice about this event is we've tried to focus upon the younger generation of emerging process scholars who are doing great work across these disciplines. But we didn't want to just capture the youth, I'd say. That's why we've collected seasoned moderators. Seasoned there is a sign of wisdom. We've collected seasoned moderators to help guide the discussions throughout the conference. Now, let me just mention a few housekeeping rules before we get started. So we do have a bathroom here, all-gender bathroom in the back left. There's also a female restroom here. My sense is those are going to be full. There's also a restroom in the back here in the church building that you can find just around the corner, so feel free to use those. I've asked the moderators to keep time in an omnipotent fashion. So presenters, we're limiting you to 20 minutes, and we're asking the moderators to aid us in that task. Several of the presenters will have slides. If you are presenters using slides, make sure you connect with me up front a little time before you give your presentation, just to make sure everything is in gear. Okay, some of you may have noticed we have an anniversary book for sale. This was put together by our CPS colleague, Jahan. It's a wonderful, what I'd like to call a photographic retrospect of some of the key moments that have been a part of the 50-year legacy of the Center for Process Studies. If you're a moderator or you're a presenter at our conference, we are gifting you a hardback version of that. So make sure you do grab that if you haven't. And for those of you who are just attending the conference, we are selling copies in the back for $20. It's really a beautiful look at some of the moments throughout the last 5 decades. And with that, I'm going to invite the Executive Director, Andrew Schwartz, to the podium to continue our introductions, and we will get started. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
See what I did right here? I lowered the microphone. I'm not a giant, but that's also an example to the rest of you who will be speaking. Our tech people said, please speak into the mic, and it may require some adjustments, so don't be afraid to touch it. It's okay, it's friendly. 50 years. It's a long time. I mean, John might be like, well, it's a flash in the pan. I've been around almost 100. But like for the rest of us, a lot has happened over the last 50 years. And this conference is about celebrating that. It's celebrating the past. But we're also looking to the future. And I think that's super exciting. And it's the blend of those two, right? Coming out of a rich history and then sort of moving forward to new possibilities that, I don't know, gives me energy and excitement. So I'm looking forward to explore that throughout the week. But I thought it would be helpful as we look to the future to really understand the past a little bit better. Well, I haven't been around that long, but I know some people who have. So, people who need no introduction, John Cobb and Marjorie Suchocki.
Well, I think very appropriately, the past gets 15 minutes and the rest of the time is the future. And Marjorie and I will share the 15 minutes. I think maybe I will spend my time just telling you how the center got started with one or two references to what went on after we got started. But the history really goes back to the University of Chicago, where there was, at the time I was a student there, two places in the university where process thought was being promoted. One of them was that Charles Hartshorne was teaching in the Department of Philosophy, and the other was that the Divinity School was oriented to a kind of theological naturalism that was very much a process-oriented naturalism. And I can assure you that these were two very different phenomena. Hartshorne is the supreme rationalist. The Divinity School was completely empirical or phenomenological. But it was great to be exposed to both of those. And Chicago, especially the Divinity School, attracted very good students, and they were going out to teach. So it functioned as a center for keeping the process mode of thinking alive and present within the theological seminaries and other places in the United States and beyond the United States as well. So I was the recipient of both of those, and I decided they were both wrong, so I chose to take the speculative path, which is the Whiteheadian path. I thought both the rationalists and the empiricists were seeking certainty, and I don't think certainty is possible. So I think we need to all recognize that our thought is provisional and not final. And I think Whitehead does a good job of understanding himself that way. In any case, I had no idea of ever taking any leadership in this area, but Chicago, which had understood itself when I was there as a center of intellectual activity, changed to become more like the rest of the major universities in the country and became a collection of academic disciplines. And there's no academic discipline that can embody or even include real process thinking, because process thinking is radically opposed to that kind of scholarship and that kind of division of thought into separate, independent departments. And so as a graduate of that program, I became distressed that I did not see any way in which what I considered a far more hopeful direction could survive in American higher education. And if it disappears from higher education, it doesn't have a great chance of great success in the culture as a whole. So it was that kind of worry about the loss of the one center for process thinking in the country that led to me and David Griffin, who was my student, beginning to talk about, would it be possible to create something? And the first thing that we succeeded in creating was a journal. So in 1970, the first issues of Process Studies were published. And that journal continues, and I understand Don Dombrowski is here, and I hope we have a chance to get acquainted with him. He's the one who's carrying it on now. But then David and I figured out what it would take to create a center. Well, we said, well, it would take having a member of a faculty who was half-time free to actually work on the center. We didn't think full-time faculty members could create something of much significance. It's just, if you have a full-time job, you just can't give the attention to a separate activity enough to really make things happen. And then we needed $10,000 a year. Now, $10,000 a year at that time was real money. It was way more money than I was earning. I was earning about $5,000 a year. So it was an ambitious goal. I was invited to return to Emory, to the Candler School of Theology, where I had been a rather unwelcome participant before I moved to Claremont. But there was a change in leadership, and they invited me back, and I said, well, the only thing that would interest me, I mean, I was very happy in Claremont. I didn't want to move. But the one thing that would interest me if I could develop a center there. And I described what would be necessary. And the dean of the School of Theology said, we'll give you that. Well, I was getting ready to go back to Claremont, back to Emory, where I had been before I came to Claremont. And then all of a sudden, quite surprisingly, Claremont decided it could do it. So instead, I sometimes call the center the James T. Laney Center for Process Studies. Since if he hadn't offered me the job, there wouldn't have been any possibility of doing it in Claremont. So like many things, the history of its origins is of not that much importance, but it suggests the fact that things happen in unexpected and unplanned ways, and that telling you what the next 50 years would be like would be simply false. Nobody knows. And I hope nobody knows. Because the only futures I can project out of the present for the planet are terrible. I'm hoping very much that I will be completely surprised by the events of the next few years. And if I'm not surprised by them, we're in real trouble. And how we could plan for one program when the whole civilization is threatened, I don't know. But we can do, it's amazing what may happen if you do your best, if you open. And I think we've done that. David Griffin, of course, who helped me think about having it, was the person who I brought in, and he did truly remarkable work. We talked about him last night. I'm not going to try to repeat that, but 3/4 of the success of the center is to be credited to him. I think it was amazing. I don't know anybody else who could have done what he did in organizing conference after conference, which brought together many of the most interesting people in many fields, and being able to talk with them conference after conference in ways that they respected. That was David's achievement. In more recent years, well, from beginning already fairly early, it spawned other organizations. So there's a whole family of organizations that grew out of the center. The first and most important is the Institute for the Postmodern Development of China. Process thought is a much more important player in China than it is in the United States. And then out of the 2015 conference came two organizations to carry on the work of that conference, one of them Pando-Populist and the other the Institute for Ecological Civilization. I won't try to recite all the others. I foolishly, at the age of 97, created a new organization to add to that, and it's having its problems, but it's coming along. I think it's beginning to find something concretely that it can do that might make a difference. And many other people are finding things to do. Matt Siegel is here. It's not a separate organization, but we have an advisory council on science for the Cobb Institute. Well, that's the only thing that's happening in the field of science. And we have to remember, Whitehead comes to us from logic, mathematics, physics. And to drop that connection, to lose that connection, would be really a terrible loss. No. And I'm hoping that, among other things, we will see some glimpses of hope for the future. From the very beginning, we had a major division. We were David and I were particularly interested, for us, theology was looking at everything from a Christian point of view. And so we were wanting to influence a very, very secular university system, the thinkers in that system. But there was also an interest in process theology in the churches. And Marjorie Suchocki played a large role in making that a very effective process and faith program, and she's going to tell you a little bit about that.
How gladly we accept a little bit of assistance in our upper years, John. Yes. Well, if we had a start in Emory, in some respect, for eventually having a Center for Process Studies, it's also the case that in 1984, I'm sure all of you remember that date with remarkable clarity, in 1984, there was a biblical scholar at Emory whose name was William Beardsley. He had written a book called A House for Hope, and in this book, he remarkably takes process sensitivities and uses them to understand and to interpret the biblical studies, particularly the New Testament. Well, in 1984, the guy retires. Sometimes we do that. And so he retired to Pilgrim Place in Claremont. And of course, he came in contact regularly with John, who was still, of course, at the School of Theology, living over on 10th Street, as I recall. In any case, Will said, but if we have a Center for Process Studies, there has to be attention to the churches. Process theology is really important to many pastors in ministry, and congregations, if they knew about it, might really appreciate it. And so he began the Center for Process and Faith, to be a subgroup within the larger Center for Process Studies. And lo and behold, it happened. And he was a wonderful inaugurator of this. He was an expert in New Testament studies. He saw to the use of Bible and theology together, viewed through a process frame of relationality. and created a very fine impact. He worked he was here for around 15 years. During that time, he held conferences and had programs for pastors to understand more about process theology, how process theology preached, what process theology could mean for Christian education. And he did this work for the rest of his life, which unfortunately concluded in the year 2000. And so there was the Process and Faith Center, a little office over in, Claremont School of Theology, and there was no one to direct it. And there I was. I'd finished being dean, which is a remarkable job enough, and one is very glad to leave. And here was another opportunity. And so I began directing the center. It was a marvelous time. I had a group of students working with me. Janine Sledham, who has this absolute uncanny ability to do publications. And we took this little journal, Creative Transformation, and made it with beautiful photographs in the cover, and pretty soon Janine said, "I think it should be in color." "Of course," said I, and so it was. And then it was so marvelous to meet together with pastors. They would come, we would have a summer institute on process theology. We had a couple from Wenatchee, Washington, who were pastoral care people, and they began developing pastoral care from a process perspective. And it went on and on. We had Mary Elizabeth Moore, the best education teacher ever. This is before she decided to become a dean at Boston University. And she was in charge of a column on Christian education. We had Paul Nancaro, who was a marvelous liturgist, and he had columns on how to conduct a liturgy. We would sit in that little tiny office, laughing our heads off as we thought of one thing after another that we could begin to do, making process theology accessible to pastors and to the congregations they served. It was a wonderful journey, and I did that for a number of years, and then it was time for me to move on, and Janine Sledham took it over. She was also particularly good at developing the liturgy. We had we had liturgical content and lectionary studies, and she really managed those as well, developing the lectionary studies for pastors who wanted to look up a process perspective on what the lectionary for this coming Sunday would be. So these things continued. We also had a Rhodes Scholars program. You've all heard of Rhodes Scholars. We spelled ours R-O-A-D, scholars, in which students who knew process theology would take to the road and go to any church to talk with people there about ways of thinking about Christianity through the lens of a relational theology, process theology. It was a marvelous venture, and it continues today. And I'm very grateful for my part in it. Thank you.
What a history. And that's a glimpse into the past. It's a history that many of you helped to make, and I'm very grateful for that. One of the ways we've been trying to honor this history, and particularly John Cobb's legacy, is the creation of something called the John Cobb Legacy Fund. And I'd like to invite my colleague Sheri Kling to say a few words about that.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning. So the John Cobb Legacy Fund, and by the way, I'm Sheri Kling. I'm also Director of Process and Faith, but I am Director of the Legacy Fund as well. And the Legacy Fund is a planned giving program that was founded by the Center for Process Studies, the Cobb Institute, and the Institute for Ecological Civilization. And it was created as a way to further the work that John Cobb began and inspired. And so we can help supporters of these organizations both provide for their families and support the causes that they care the most deeply about. And so we have various ways that we can help people think about their own personal legacy and how they can use their legacy to help further this work that we care so much about. And so I just wanted to point out, we have a table there at the back corner, and there we have two things that you might be interested in picking up for yourself. One is a copy of a estate planning guide. So it's just a nice way for you to step through your own thinking about what you have and what you're going to do with it and all of those things. And it's just a really helpful resource. So we have those available. And we also have these very lovely little eyeglass cleaning cloths. So if any of you wear eyeglasses and would like to grab one of these, they're back there at the back. And you know, this week while you're here, I'm happy to talk with anyone this week or after you go back home. So just let me know if we can be of help. And thank you so much.